welcome. I'm Oles Garjuk, and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree simplifying the procedure of getting the Russian citizenship for people living in temporarily occupied parts of Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Ukraine's main diplomat and Foreign Affairs Minister Pavlo Klimkin has called it a new stage of the Russian occupation of Donbas. To talk more about this, we welcome to the studio today Ilya Ponomarev, former Russian MP who had to flee the country because of politically motivated persecution. Hello and thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you in this studio, always interesting conversations. So let's start. Ukraine's Foreign Affairs Minister Pavlo Klimkin called on all Ukrainian citizens who are residing on these temporarily occupied parts of Donetsk and Luhansk regions not to accept any documents, any invitations to to register as the citizens of Russian Federation. And he sent this message, quote, Russia has deprived you of the present, but now it puts its hands on your future. In your opinion, what is Putin's plan?
I think that Putin is creating a platform for future bargaining with President-elect Vladimir Zelensky.
Future bargaining.
Yeah, I think that he wants to raise the stakes. That's his usual approach, and many people were afraid that he would start some military assault in the area. Yes. Thanks God he didn't do that. But from the other side, military advances and military campaigns are easy to stop and to retreat the forces. But when he would distribute some millions of Russian passports in the region, what he would do after that? Are you going to revoke them or what?
Well, you said that he wants to increase the stakes. What level until?
Until he would see that Ukrainian position has shifted, that President-elect is ready to budge.
Does he want this president-elect to be subordinate to him, basically? And does he want to see an ally in the personality of Volodymyr Zelensky? Or does he want this full-scale invasion and occupation and official declaring of war? What does he want?
Well, obviously he wants to control Ukraine. So what you
there
said
could be
about
control and there could be an occupation.
That is right. I don't think that he wants the occupation, because when you occupy something, you need to take care of this, and most likely it would be a partisan war against the invaders, and he cannot not realize this. So I don't think that that he's thinking about the occupation. He's thinking about the Ukrainian politicians who would, as you said, be the subordinates and would do what he wishes to. But I don't think that in Vladimir Zelensky he actually sees this kind of politician. I think that he actually waited until the outcome of the elections, and when he eventually realized that it's not the former president who was to stay, but it's the new president who is coming, then when he made his move.
Do you think that he is testing right now the position, the strength of stance of Volodymyr Zelensky? This is the move to test him?
Yes, this is a test, and he thinks that the guy is young, the guy is immature, the guy is inexperienced, and
yes,
he wants to provoke mistakes on his behalf. In a sense, the current situation for the new Ukrainian president is more like a zugzwang, a lose-lose situation, because whatever he would do, if he would do something about this, in terms of people who live on those territories, that would be seen as a sign of at best losing face, or a weakness, or a hostility, or something like that. Because Russian passports, the main meaning of Russian passports for residents of those regions means the access to Russian social programs, and currently they're hanging in limbo. Some of them, they still receive pensions from Ukraine, some do not. Anyway, the living standards on those territories, they are significantly lower than both in Ukraine and in Russia. And by giving the passports, it's what Putin has said himself, that it's a humanitarian action for us, that they are deprived of basic human rights, of basic human dignity, so we are coming to...
Russia can provide human rights in these territories?
No, it's how you would treat human rights. If you talk about elections or whatever, of course not, but if you're talking about the access to healthcare, to education, to jobs, of course, being a Russian citizen, all those issues would be way easier for those people. That's why I do anticipate that it would be very numerous people who would actually receive those citizenship.
And this, if you mentioned that the occupation is costly, well, this issue of granting passports to the Ukrainian citizens and making them, well, another aspect is that they have the right not to give up their Ukrainian passports. So basically, they can be bipartisan, and making them bipartisan citizens puts some pressure on the Russian budget, right? We're talking about, you mentioned the social...
Yeah, if we calculate the average pension size of Russian pensioner and multiply it by number of pensioners in Donbas, it would be around $4 billion US. If we assume that maybe it would be half of them who would obtain the citizenship, we are getting closer to $2 billion US. Still, it's a lot.
$2 billion US dollars.
Yeah, and
this region.
Of course, Ukraine cannot offer the same. It would be too costly for its budget. Especially that those people on those territories, they don't pay anything for Ukrainian budget. The whole economy on those territories is not paying taxes to Ukrainian budget. So Ukraine cannot compensate this financially, but what else it can offer to those people?
Well, and also Ukraine doesn't have a direct tool to compensate these people, or not to compensate, just to provide the social care, social help in terms of pensions and other financial help, because the territory is occupied, and the only way to help these people out is on the controlled territory of Ukraine. If these people would travel back and forth to receive this kind of financial assistance.
To finance pensions, you need to get taxes. And to get taxes, you need industry working.
Well,
and there is no industry there, and there are no taxes which are being paid.
We were speaking with you about this test for Volodymyr Zelensky and the candidate who won the elections. Yes, the future president Volodymyr Zelensky hasn't commented on this issue, but we have a quote from his team's statement on Facebook. Let's listen.
With the decree to issue Russian passports to Ukrainian citizens in the territories which temporarily are not controlled by our state, the Russian Federation has recognized its responsibility as an occupying state.
Well, very brief, but we do understand the general emotion, the condemnation of the Kremlin's destabilizing actions. Do you think that Zelensky has to deliver some public statement urgently?
We see that they are trying to balance, and very reasonably balance, because we have an acting president right now, and if president-elect would start to say something which even slightly differ from what the president is saying, that's not good for international image of Ukraine. Thanks God they are acting pretty much in sync right now. They both support the same set of actions that President Poroshenko appealed to United Nations, and that was fully supported and endorsed by future President Vladimir Zelensky.
Yeah, we're talking about the UN Security Council, this emergency meeting, right?
Yeah, that's right, and they are calling for international community, again, to join forces, to increase the pressure on Russian Federation through sanctions, through other methods. This is absolutely right, because obviously I fully agree with what Zelensky's team published on its Facebook, that this is obviously a confirmation of the occupied state of those territories. Actually, I very much surprised that Vladimir Putin actually decided to go in particular this way,
Why?
Because he is actually shooting himself in the leg. His propaganda was telling stories for those 5 years that it's a civil war that is happening.
That Russia is not involved.
Yeah, that Russia is not involved. Now it would be no longer a civil war. Now it would be a war between Ukraine and the territory which is occupied by Russian citizens. So it's a kind of different story. Plus, additionally, President Putin's popularity has significantly declined last year because of the pension reform.
Because of the pension reform.
And when he was justifying the need for the pension reform to Russians, he said that there is such a great deficit of the pension fund of Russian Federation, so it's unsustainable. They cannot pay any longer from the same age. And now they say, okay, we actually can add another 500,000 pensioners to the pension system. So it appears that there is some money to pay them. So it's a kind of contradiction. And of course, if that would be properly explained to Russian people, that can present a serious problem for Mr. Putin internally.
You mentioned that the approach of Vladimir Zelensky, the future president, and the incumbent president Petro Poroshenko is synchronized, and I would like us to come back to this discussion about this issuing of passports. Let's listen to the soundbite and the reaction of the incumbent president.
The Kremlin is knowingly and cynically violating the international law that prohibits the occupation authorities to change citizenship of the residents of occupied territory. The illegal issue of Russian passports using the South Ossetia and Transnistria scenario is an attempt to legitimize the Russian presence on the occupied parts of the Ukrainian Donbas. I call on the international partners to prevent the worst turn of events and to strongly condemn the destructive and criminal actions of the Russian authorities, as well as to strengthen the international sanctions regime.
Well, here Mr. Poroshenko is hinting that the full-scale invasion is possible, and then also we could refer to the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Alexander Turchinov, who said that the Russian president's decree creates legal conditions for the official use of the Russian armed forces against Ukraine. I do remember that in the beginning of our conversation you said that you do not really believe in the whole plan of Ukraine's occupation, but still, Ukrainian renowned journalists, they believe that there is some kind of scenario, the usual scenario that Russia has been using against Transnistria region or against Georgia, when there are Russian citizens present on this kind of uncontrolled part, uncontrolled territory, and now this will be Ukrainian citizens who will be granted with the Russian passport. Then there's going to be some kind of provocation, some terrorist acts, some shellings, some killings, deaths, and some tragedies. And after that, Russia, as a powerful, huge state, is going to defend its citizens. Because the citizen is the biggest value of Russia, according to Russian propaganda.
I don't think that this is the scenario. I think that when Mr. Poroshenko and Mr. Turchinov are saying what they're saying, what we have just heard, they're absolutely correct. That's exactly what Putin wants them to understand, that he has created certain legal grounds, certain justification for military invasion, but the objective is to get Mr. Zelensky scared. So make him budge, make him retreat, make him more susceptible for any kind of compromises with Russia. And this compromise is, of course, a lot about Crimea, the status of Crimea, but also on the Russian conditions, Kremlin conditions of peace in eastern Ukraine. Because at the end of the day, as I said from the very beginning, Mr. Putin is not interested in controlling part of Donbas. That doesn't make any neither economical, nor social, nor patriotic, nor whatever sense for him. For him, the whole of Ukraine would make sense. So he needs the Ukrainian leadership as its whole to compromise with him and to do what he wants him to do. And to achieve this objective, he wants to make them believe that he is ready to invade.
So he wants to scare the authorities that it's just a matter of his decision, which has some basis, some grounds, whether to invade or not. Well, I also do remember our previous conversation in this studio, and we had a personal conversation, not in this studio, but about this intelligence report that the President Petro Poroshenko was delivering to the Ukrainian population about this drastic increasement in Russian military presence near the borders. And back then, I do remember that you were kind of well, not, I wouldn't say positive, but you were thinking that there could be some possibilities of this full-scale invasion. After this few months that we haven't had any conversations, what have changed that now you do believe that this is a bargaining instead of this huge threat, instead of the real officially declared war?
No, when we were talking, I was saying that the invasion is possible, but not with the forces that you're currently referring to, and what Mr. Poroshenko was referring to. I think that those forces that were deployed on the eastern borders of Ukraine behind those occupied territories, it was more a defensive force. In terms of Kremlin had this scenario in their crazy minds that Poroshenko, trying to stay in power, can create an offensive against those unrecognized republics to reconquer them with a military force, and that was an indication that if you guys would advance, that we have something to protect those territories with. I think that was the message. I said that the real threat in terms of invasion is not coming through a frontal attack, because that would be not reasonable in the military sense, because you are coming to a very well defended front lines. I said that the weak part is offensive that can go through Azov Sea, in the flank of Ukrainian army, and we were discussing that this area needs to be reinforced, and maybe a NATO base can be invited in that region to provide the same type security, so that nobody would think that they can utilize marine weakness of Ukraine.
And this is what happened. NATO ships are kind of monitoring the situation,
and that's very positive thing.
Yes, very much. Well, thank you so much for this interesting conversation. I would like to continue, because we haven't finished yet, I think, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Thank you for your interesting comments.
Well, thanks for having me.
That was Ilya Ponomarev, former Russian MP. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gerjuk. Goodbye.